A thin paperback, no bigger than a passport, sits behind glass in a museum case. Its cover reads, "The Negro Motorist Green Book." Inside, in dense type, are hundreds of listings. Hotels, restaurants, gas stations, organized state by state, town by town. Each one marked safe because someone had verified that a black traveler could walk through the door without being turned away, arrested, or worse.
Before we follow the roads this little book was built to navigate, subscribe to America Beyond Origins, because some of the most important stories in American history are hiding in the places the history books left out.
What the book leaves out matters even more. Entire towns are missing, not by accident, but because there was nowhere safe to stop. For nearly 30 years, that absence served as its own warning, silent and total. Nowhere to eat, nowhere to sleep, nowhere to be after dark. This is the story of the towns that built that silence on purpose, and of the Americans forced to navigate a country where an ordinary road trip could become a matter of survival. There were far more of these towns, in far more corners of America, than most people have ever been taught. The practice that would come to be known as the Sundown town didn't arrive all at once. It built gradually in the decades after Reconstruction collapsed in the 1870s, as the brief window of federal protection for formerly enslaved people's civil rights closed, and white communities across the country, not just in the South, began experimenting with new and increasingly organized ways to keep black residents out entirely. Historian James Loewen, who spent much of his later career trying to map the true scale of the phenomenon, arrived at a number that stunned even him. In states like Illinois, Indiana, and Oregon, a majority of towns fit the pattern of racial exclusion at some point between 1890 and 1968. The mechanism, in its earliest and most brutal form, rarely bothered with subtlety. In 1909, the twin towns of Anna and Jonesboro, Illinois, expelled their entire black population in the direct aftermath of a public lynching, and the exclusion held for generations. Residents later confirmed that signs carrying a racial slur, warning black travelers not to let the sun set on them within town limits, remained posted at the town's edges as late as the 1970s. Pierce City, Missouri, followed the same script in 1901, a mob-driven expulsion that emptied the town of its black residents almost overnight and never meaningfully reversed. Some entries on this list may already be familiar to longtime viewers of this channel. Forsyth County, Georgia, forced out more than 1,000 black residents in a single violent season in 1912, and remained functionally all white for nearly 75 years afterward. A story we've told here before, and one that turns out to be far less isolated than it first appears once you start counting how many other counties ran the same playbook. Because that's the part of this history that rarely makes it into textbooks. This wasn't a regional anomaly, confined to a handful of especially hostile southern counties. It was a nationwide system, practiced with equal determination in small Midwestern crossroads towns and in suburbs that, today, carry reputations as quiet, comfortable, unremarkable places to raise a family. In 1919, a white mob in Corbin, Kentucky, rounded up roughly 200 black railroad workers at gunpoint and marched them directly to the train depot, forcing them out of town in a single coordinated night that left Corbin almost entirely white for most of the century that followed. Vienna, Illinois, maintained its own posted warning signs for decades. Elwood, Indiana, did the same. Its sign reportedly standing prominent and legible long enough that longtime residents could still recite its exact wording generations later. Passed down, less as history than as local trivia, stripped of the violence that had put it there in the first place. Harrison, Arkansas, didn't stop at a single expulsion. Mobs drove out the town's black population not once, but twice, in 1905 and again in 1909. And the reputation that followed, a town actively unsafe for black travelers, persisted openly for the better part of a century, well documented enough that it became a recurring case study in later research on the phenomenon. Mena, Arkansas, followed a similar pattern of violent expulsion around the same period, one of dozens of small towns across Arkansas and neighboring states that arrived at the same outcome through nearly identical means. Further west and further north, the method began to shift, even as the outcome held steady. Glendale, California, and Edina, Minnesota, achieved the same racial exclusion without mob violence at all, relying instead on restrictive housing covenants, legal language written directly into property deeds that barred homeowners from ever selling to black buyers, enforceable in court rather than in the street. It was quieter than a lynching, and in some ways more durable, because it didn't require an angry crowd to maintain. It only required a lawyer, a title company, and a community willing to look the other way, while property law did the work violence had done elsewhere. Some research has traced similar exclusionary practices to college towns like Norman, Oklahoma, in the early 20th century, suggesting that the pattern reached even into communities built around higher education, institutions that like to imagine themselves as more enlightened than the small rural towns surrounding them. By the middle of the 20th century, the country was effectively running two parallel systems side by side, one built on open violence and one on paperwork, both aimed at the exact same result, both quietly backed by local police departments that either looked away or actively enforced the boundary themselves. Then, in 1968, Congress passed the Fair Housing Act, making explicit racial exclusion from housing illegal nationwide. On paper, the entire system was supposed to end that year. In practice, in at least one town, the new law and the old violence collided within hours of each other. And what happened next showed exactly how far behind reality was lagging the legislation meant to fix it. On the night the Fair Housing Act formally took effect in 1968, a 21-year-old black door-to-door sales representative named Carol Jenkins was going house to house in Martinsville, Indiana, selling encyclopedias when she was murdered in the street. The case went unsolved for more than 3 decades, not closed until 2002, after one of the original suspects' own daughters finally came forward with information. For most of that time, Martinsville carried an openly acknowledged reputation as a town black travelers avoided passing through after dark, a reputation that outlasted the federal law that was supposed to have made it irrelevant by more than 30 years. Vidor, Texas, held on to a version of the same reputation even longer. When federal officials attempted to desegregate a public housing complex there in 1993, moving a small number of black residents in for what was, functionally, the first time in the town's modern history, the effort required a level of security assistance more commonly associated with school integration crises decades earlier, and drew open, organized protests from Ku Klux Klan members stationed at the town's edge. Within months, nearly every black family who had moved in left again, unable to sustain daily life under the sustained hostility the move had provoked. The federal government had won the legal argument. The town had, in practice, won the outcome anyway. Not every confrontation played out in a small rural town far from major cities. In 1951, a mob in Cicero, Illinois, just outside Chicago, spent days rioting outside an apartment building after a single black family attempted to move in, destroying the family's belongings and effectively ending the attempt entirely. A reminder that some of the most violent enforcement of these boundaries happened in the immediate shadow of major northern cities that like to imagine racial exclusion as a distinctly southern problem. Levittown, the massive planned suburb built across New York and Pennsylvania starting in the late 1940s and marketed as the blueprint for post-war American prosperity, achieved its own exclusion without a single riot, simply by having its developer refuse, as a matter of explicit written policy, to sell homes to black families at all. Ask yourself honestly, how many towns you've driven through without a second thought, on a road trip or a daily commute, were places your own grandparents or their neighbors would have had to plan their arrival and departure around daylight just to stay alive? That question doesn't have a clean, comfortable answer for most American families, which is exactly why so few of these towns' full histories ever made it into the version of the past most of us were taught. Most of the towns on this list are legally open to anyone today, and a great many current residents have no idea their community was ever built, deliberately and often violently, around racial exclusion in the first place. But researchers studying what Lowen termed second-generation Sundown town issues have found something harder to dismiss than old signage. Many of these communities remain disproportionately, sometimes overwhelmingly white decades after the laws that built them that way were formally struck down. Evidence that a policy enforced for the better part of a century doesn't simply dissolve the moment it becomes illegal to enforce it openly. The Green Book that guided Black travelers safely around towns like these for decades stopped being published in 1966. Its stated purpose rendered legally obsolete 2 years later by the Fair Housing Act. The actual list of places it had quietly been warning people about never got nearly as short as the law implied it would. It just stopped being written down anywhere travelers could still consult it, which meant the risk didn't disappear. It simply became harder to see coming. That's the through line connecting every town on this list, from the ones that posted their warnings on a sign at the county line to the ones that buried theirs inside a property deed. The goal was never subtlety for its own sake. It was continuity, making sure the exclusion could survive long after the method used to enforce it went out of fashion, adapting from rope and gunfire to zoning boards and mortgage paperwork without ever losing sight of the outcome it was built to protect. 15 towns, some separated by nearly half a century, yet connected by the same promise made to their own residents, that the people who belong there would continue to look the way they always had, whatever it cost those forced to remain outside the boundary. Some of these communities have spent recent years confronting that history with honesty, installing historical markers, issuing formal apologies, and working with descendants of those who were driven away. Others have yet to acknowledge it at all. If there's a town near you with a reputation you've never quite been able to explain, or a family story about a place your relatives were warned to avoid, we'd love to hear about it in the comments. These are exactly the kinds of histories this channel exists to preserve, so they are never allowed to disappear twice. This is America beyond origins. Some borders were never drawn on any official map. We're still tracing the ones enforced only by fear. If you believe forgotten history deserves to be remembered, subscribe and join us for the next story.